The silence of the desert night was broken only by the soft sound of a woman's desperate prayers, and Morgan Keller reined in his horse when he heard the trembling voice carried on the wind across the empty Texas plains. He had been riding for 3 days straight, pushing through the unforgiving landscape between San Antonio and the small town of Granite, exhausted and covered in trail dust. It was late August in 1878, and the heat of the day still radiated from the cracked earth, even though the sun had set hours ago. Morgan had planned to make camp near the limestone outcropping ahead, but the sound of someone in distress cut through his fatigue like a knife. His hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip as he guided his bay gelding toward the source of the voice. Bandits and desperados roamed these parts freely, and a lone woman out here after dark could mean trouble of any variety. But as he crested a small rise, what he saw made him pause. She knelt on a worn blanket spread across the rocky ground, her face turned upward toward the brilliant canopy of stars overhead. Her hands were clasped together so tightly that even from this distance, Morgan could see her knuckles had gone white. She wore a simple calico dress that had seen better days, and her dark hair hung loose down her back, tangled and dusty from travel. A small covered wagon sat abandoned about 20 yards behind her, one wheel canted at an awkward angle. No horse or mule was tethered nearby. "Please," she was saying, her voice cracking with emotion. "I do not know what else to do. I am lost and alone, and I have no one left to turn to. If you are listening, if you care about one soul as small as mine, please send help. Send someone who can guide me through this darkness. I am not asking for riches or comfort, just a sign that I have not been completely forsaken." Morgan sat motionless on his horse, feeling like an intruder on this intimate moment. He had not prayed himself in years, not since his mother died when he was 16. Faith had seemed like a luxury he could not afford in the harsh reality of frontier life. But something about the raw honesty in this woman's plea stirred something in his chest that he had thought long dead. She lowered her head then, and he saw her shoulders shake with silent sobs. The sight made his decision for him. He clicked his tongue softly and urged his horse forward, deliberately making enough noise that she would hear his approach and not be startled. She spun around with a gasp, scrambling to her feet. In the starlight, he could see her face was streaked with tears and dirt, but her eyes held a fierce determination even through her fear. She was young, probably no more than 22 or 23, and despite her disheveled state, there was something striking about her features. High cheekbones, full lips, and those eyes that seemed to reflect the stars themselves. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steadier than he expected. "State your business, sir." Morgan slowly dismounted, keeping his hands visible and away from his weapon. "Name is Morgan Keller, miss. I heard you from the trail and came to see if you needed assistance. I mean you no harm." She studied him warily, taking in his worn leather vest, the dusty hat, the stubble on his jaw. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and green eyes that had seen too much for his 26 years. He looked exactly like what he was, a cowboy who had spent most of his life working cattle drives and taking whatever honest work he could find. "How do I know you are telling the truth?" she asked, though some of the tension had left her posture. "I reckon you do not," Morgan admitted. "But seeing as you just asked God to send you help and here I am, maybe you should consider the possibility that your prayer was answered." She blinked at him, clearly surprised by his directness. Then, unexpectedly, a small laugh escaped her lips, though it sounded more like a sob. "That would require me to believe God actually listens to someone like me." "Someone like you?" Morgan took a careful step closer. "What does that mean?" She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very small and vulnerable. Someone who has lost everything. Someone who watched her father die of fever 2 weeks ago and buried him beside the trail with her own hands. Someone whose wagon wheel broke this morning and whose horse ran off when she tried to unhitch it alone. Someone who has not eaten in 2 days and who has no idea how to survive out here. The words came out in a rush, as if she had been holding them in for so long that they could not be contained any longer. When she finished, she looked almost surprised at herself, as if she had not meant to reveal so much to a complete stranger. Morgan felt his heart constrict with sympathy. He had seen plenty of suffering in his years, but there was something about this woman that got under his skin. "What is your name, Miss Victoria?" she said quietly. "Victoria Ward. My friends called me Vicky, but there are no friends left anymore." "Well, Miss Ward, I think we need to get you fed and watered before anything else. I have supplies on my horse and we can make camp here for the night. Come morning, we will figure out what to do about your wagon." She hesitated, clearly torn between her need for help and her fear of trusting a stranger. Morgan understood her dilemma perfectly. A woman alone with a man she had just met could face dangers worse than starvation or exposure. But he also knew that she had no real choice, and he could see the moment she reached the same conclusion. "I would be grateful for some food," she said finally. "And I promise I am not entirely helpless. I can help with the camp." Over the next hour, they worked together to set up a proper campsite. Morgan proved to be efficient and respectful, always keeping an appropriate distance and explaining what he was doing before he did it. He built a small fire using dried mesquite and got water boiling for coffee while Victoria accepted his offering of dried beef and hardtack. It was not much, but she ate it like it was a feast, making him realize just how hungry she truly was. "How long were you traveling with your father?" Morgan asked as they sat across the fire from each other, the flames casting dancing shadows across their faces. Victoria took a sip of the hot coffee he had poured for her, savoring the warmth. "We left Missouri 3 months ago. Papa had heard there was good land to be claimed in West Texas, and after Mama died last winter, he could not stand to stay in the place where they had been happy together. He wanted a fresh start, but he never made it. No." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "The fever came on suddenly, about 2 weeks ago. We were still a few days outside of San Antonio. He tried to fight it, told me he would be fine, but I could see him getting weaker every day. On the 4th day, he just did not wake up. I wrapped him in our best blanket and buried him as deep as I could dig. I said words over him, though I am not sure I said them right. Then I kept driving west because I did not know what else to do." Morgan stared into the fire, processing her story. "You were heading to Granite." "I do not know. Papa had the map and the information about where we were supposed to go. When he died, I just kept following the setting sun because he had always said we were going west. I should have turned back to San Antonio, I know, but I kept thinking that if I could just reach the place he had been heading, I could claim the land in his name and build the life he had wanted. It seems foolish now." "It does not seem foolish," Morgan said firmly. "It seems brave. Plenty of grown men would have fallen apart in your situation." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he felt the weight of her gaze like a physical thing. "Why are you being kind to me? What do you want in return?" The question was fair, he supposed. In his experience, few people did anything without expecting something back. But the answer that came to his lips was simple and honest. "Nothing. I am being kind because it is the right thing to do, and because I cannot imagine riding past someone in need without stopping. My mother raised me better than that." "You said raised past tense. Is she gone?" 10 years now. Cholera outbreaks swept through our town in Kansas, took her and my younger sister both. My father had died years before in the war, so after that I was alone. I have been drifting ever since, working where I can, moving when I get restless. Victoria nodded slowly, understanding passing between them. They were both orphans now, both untethered from the lives they had once known. It created an unexpected connection, a shared experience that bridged the gap between strangers. "Where were you headed before you found me?" she asked. "Granite, actually. I have a job waiting there, working for a cattle operation owned by a man named Dutch Crenshaw. He is supposed to be expanding his herd and needs experienced hands. The pay is decent, and I heard Granite is a growing town with opportunity for those willing to work hard." "That is where Papa was heading," Victoria said, sudden excitement in her voice. "Granite, Texas. That is the town he mentioned. He said there was a land office there and parcels available for homesteading." "Then it seems we are going to the same place," Morgan said. "If you would like, you can travel with me. It is about 3 more days' ride, maybe 4 with your wagon if we can fix that wheel. It would be safer than you trying to make it on your own." She bit her lip, clearly thinking it through. "You would do that, help me get there." "I would. And once we arrive, I can help you get settled, make sure you are not taken advantage of. The frontier can be rough on women alone, but if you have legitimate claim to land, the law should protect you." "I have papers," Victoria said quickly. "Papa kept all the documents in a metal box in the wagon. The claim is in his name, but surely I can inherit it." "We will sort it out," Morgan assured her. "But first, you need rest. You look exhausted." As if his words had permission to release her, Victoria suddenly swayed where she sat. Morgan moved quickly, circling the fire to steady her before she could fall. His hands on her shoulders were gentle but firm, and he felt her trembling beneath his touch. "When did you last sleep?" he asked. "I do not remember," she admitted. "I was too frightened to close my eyes last night." Every sound seemed like a threat. "Well, you can sleep safely tonight. I will keep watch and make sure nothing bothers you. You can use my bedroll." She started to protest, but he cut her off with a look. "I have spent plenty of nights sleeping on the ground with just my saddle for a pillow. You need the rest more than I do. Please, Miss Ward, let me help you." The fight went out of her, and she nodded. Morgan spread his bedroll near the fire and helped her settle onto it. She was asleep, almost before her head touched the blanket, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion now that she was not completely alone anymore. Morgan returned to his spot across the fire and watched her sleep for a long moment. She looked younger in repose, the worry lines smoothing from her forehead. Her dark hair fanned out around her head like a halo, and in the firelight he could see the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. He had not been entirely honest with her. While everything he said was true, he had left out one crucial detail. The moment he had seen her kneeling beneath the stars, something had shifted in his chest. It was like a door he had not known was closed had suddenly opened, letting light into a dark room. He did not believe in love at first sight, had always thought such notions were the foolish dreams of romantic poets. But he could not deny that something had happened when he looked at Victoria Ward, something that made him want to protect her, to see her smile, to be the answer to the prayer she had whispered into the night. He shook his head at his own thoughts. She was a woman in distress who needed practical help, nothing more. He would get her safely to Granite, help her establish her claim, and then go about his business. That was the right thing to do, the smart thing to do. Getting emotionally involved would only complicate matters. But even as he told himself this, Morgan knew he was fighting a losing battle. Victoria Ward had somehow slipped past his defenses in the space of a single conversation, and he suspected that extracting her from his thoughts was going to prove impossible. The night passed slowly. Morgan dozed lightly, his senses still attuned to any potential danger. Coyotes called in the distance, and once he heard the distinctive sound of a rattlesnake somewhere in the rocks, but nothing came close to their camp. The fire burned low, and he fed it occasionally, keeping enough flame to ward off both animals and the chill that settled over the desert after midnight. Dawn broke gradually, the sky lightening from deep purple to pink to gold. Morgan stood and stretched, working out the kinks from a night on hard ground. Victoria still slept, curled on her side with one hand tucked under her cheek. He decided to let her rest while he investigated her wagon and saw what could be done about the broken wheel. The wagon was a standard prairie schooner, smaller than the massive Conestogas used by large families but adequate for 2 people. The canvas cover had several tears, and the wood showed signs of hard travel, but overall it was in decent condition except for the shattered rear wheel. Morgan examined the damage carefully and grimaced. The wheel had not just broken, it had essentially disintegrated. Several spokes were completely gone, and the rim was cracked in multiple places. This was not something that could be field repaired. He walked a wide circle around the campsite, hoping against hope that Victoria's horse might have stayed nearby, but there was no sign of the animal. It had likely run for miles when it got spooked, and finding it now would be near impossible. How bad is it? Morgan turned to find Victoria awake and standing near the wagon, her hair now pulled back in a practical braid. In the morning light, he could see her more clearly. She had smudges of dirt on her face and her dress was wrinkled and stained, but her eyes were brighter than they had been last night and she stood straighter. Sleep had clearly done her some good. "The wheel cannot be fixed," he said honestly. "We would need a whole new one, and I do not have materials for that. But we have options. Tell me. We could abandon the wagon and you could ride double with me on my horse. It would slow us down some, but we could make Granite in 4 days, maybe 5. Victoria looked at the wagon, clearly torn. "Everything I own is in there. All of my father's things, our clothes, the few valuables we had left. If I leave it, someone will surely steal it all." "That is likely true," Morgan agreed, "which brings me to option 2. I could ride ahead to Granite, probably make it in 2 days if I push hard. I could purchase a wheel and possibly rent or buy a horse, then come back for you. It would mean you would be alone here for 4 or 5 days total, but your possessions would be safe." "No." The word came out sharp and immediate. "I cannot stay here alone. I barely survived 2 days. 5 would be impossible." Morgan had expected that answer. "Then option 3 is to take what we can carry on my horse and in packs we can fashion and leave the wagon here. We mark the location carefully, and once we reach Granite, we can arrange to come back with proper supplies to retrieve it. The risk is that it might be found and looted in the meantime, but at least you would have some of your belongings with you." Victoria considered this, chewing on her lower lip. "What do you think I should do?" "Honestly, I think we should take your father's papers, any money you have, and whatever items are most valuable or meaningful. We cash the rest as best we can, maybe bury some of it, and plan to return with a proper wagon to collect everything. It is not perfect, but it gives us the best chance of getting you to Granite safely while preserving at least some of your possessions." She nodded slowly. "That makes sense. Let me gather what we need." They spent the next few hours going through the wagon's contents. Victoria was ruthless in her decisions, clearly understanding that sentiment had to take a backseat to practicality. She kept her father's papers, including the land claim documents, a small leather bag of coins that represented their life savings, a few pieces of her mother's jewelry, 2 changes of clothes for herself, and a worn Bible that had been in her family for 3 generations. Everything else, They carefully packed back into crates and barrels, which Morgan then helped her bury in a shallow pit they dug near a distinctive rock formation. "How will we find it again?" Victoria asked as they covered the last of the goods with dirt and stones. Morgan pulled out a small notebook and pencil from his vest pocket and quickly sketched the landscape, noting distances and distinctive features. "I have a good memory for terrain, and this drawing will help. We are about a day-and-a-half ride from Granite at a steady pace, southeast of town. When we come back, we will follow my trail markers." As they worked, they talked. Morgan learned that Victoria had been teaching at a small schoolhouse in Missouri before her mother died, and that she had always dreamed of having a home of her own with a garden and perhaps chickens. Victoria learned that Morgan had worked cattle drives from Texas to Kansas for the past 5 years, that he could rope and brand with the best of them, and that he had a soft spot for horses and dogs, but had never been able to keep either due to his drifting lifestyle. "What made you stop drifting?" Victoria asked as they prepared to leave. "Why take a permanent job in Granite?" Morgan adjusted the packs on his horse, not meeting her eyes. "I suppose I got tired of moving. A man reaches a point where he wants to put down roots, build something that lasts. I am 26 years old, and I have nothing to show for my life except some skills and a lot of memories. Seemed like it was time to change that." What he did not say was that his decision had been made less than 24 hours ago, when he had seen a woman praying beneath the stars, and realized that maybe there was more to life than just surviving day to day. But saying such a thing out loud seemed premature and possibly unwelcome, so he kept it to himself. They mounted his horse together, Victoria sitting in front of Morgan with his arms around her to hold the reins. It was an intimate arrangement, their bodies pressed close out of necessity, and Morgan tried very hard not to think about the warmth of her back against his chest, or the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair despite the days of hard travel. "Are you comfortable?" he asked, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "Yes," she said softly. "Thank you, Morgan, for everything. You do not need to thank me. Like I said, I am just doing what is right." They rode in silence for a while, the horse settling into an easy walk across the scrubland. The morning was already growing hot, and Morgan was grateful for the canteen of water they had filled from his supplies. He made Victoria drink regularly, knowing that dehydration could sneak up on someone not used to the Texas heat. As the sun climbed higher, they talked more. Victoria told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her mother who had been a seamstress and her father who had worked as a clerk in a general store. She spoke of the small joys of her life, the students she had taught, the books she loved to read, the way her mother used to sing while she worked. Morgan shared his own stories, though his were rougher around the edges. He told her about learning to ride almost before he could walk, about his first cattle drive when he was just 17 and thought he knew everything. He spoke of the men he had worked with, some good and some bad, and the wide open spaces that had been his home for so long. "Do you ever get lonely?" Victoria asked as they stopped briefly near midday to rest the horse and eat some of Morgan's dwindling supplies. He thought about the question carefully before answering. "Yes and no. When you are on a cattle drive, you are surrounded by other cowhands, so there is always noise and company. But it is surface level, you understand. Nobody shares anything real, anything that matters. So you can be in a crowd and still feel completely alone. I got used to that feeling after a while, stopped expecting anything different. That sounds terrible. It was what I knew. I am not sure I thought about it much until recently." "What changed recently?" Morgan glanced at her, sitting there with her back against a rock, and her face turned up to catch what little breeze there was. I met someone who made me remember there are other ways to live." She looked at him curiously, but he stood before she could ask more questions, not ready to explain that the someone was her. "We should keep moving. I want to cover as much ground as possible before the heat gets worse." They rode through the afternoon, passing through landscape that gradually shifted from flat scrubland to gently rolling hills dotted with live oak and juniper. Morgan kept them moving at a steady pace, not pushing too hard but making good progress. His horse, a sturdy gelding named Buck, handled the double weight without complaint. As evening approached, they came across a small creek with actual flowing water, a rare treasure in this dry country. Morgan called a halt and helped Victoria dismount, noting how stiffly she moved after hours in the saddle. "Are you sore?" he asked. "A bit," she admitted. "I am not used to riding so long. The creek water is probably safe to drink, and you should wash up if you want. I will make camp over there," he pointed to a spot about 30 yards away, screened by bushes, "and give you privacy." Victoria looked grateful for his consideration. "Thank you. I must look a fright." "You look just fine," Morgan said, then felt his face heat at the boldness of the compliment. "I mean, you look tired but well. I will just go set up camp now." He retreated quickly, mentally kicking himself for his awkwardness. He was a grown man who had been around plenty of women, yet Victoria made him feel like a green boy with his first crush. It was unsettling and exhilarating at the same time. He busied himself with making camp, a process that was becoming routine. Fire, coffee, a meal of beans, and the last of the dried beef. He was going to need to hunt soon if they were going to eat properly, but that could wait until tomorrow. Victoria returned just as he was pouring coffee, her face scrubbed clean and her hair damp and rebraided. She had changed into a fresh dress, a simple blue cotton that made her eyes seem even darker. Morgan felt his breath catch and had to look away to compose himself. "Feel better?" he asked. "Much. The cold water was wonderful." She accepted the cup of coffee he offered and sat down across from him, that familiar position from the night before. "Morgan, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Last night you said you have not prayed in years. But you seemed to understand why I was praying, what it meant to me. Why did you stop, if you do not mind me asking?" Morgan stared into his coffee cup, watching the liquid swirl. "When my mother and sister died, I prayed harder than I ever had in my life. I begged God to save them, promised I would do anything if they could just live. But they died anyway, and I guess I felt like if God would not listen to a desperate 16-year-old boy trying to save his family, then what was the point? I figured I was on my own and should stop pretending otherwise." "I understand that feeling," Victoria said quietly. "I felt it when Mama died and again when Papa followed her. I kept praying, but I was not sure anyone was listening. Last night was me at the end of my rope, one last attempt before I gave up entirely." "And what do you think now? Do you think your prayer was answered?" She met his eyes over the fire. "I do not know. You showed up, and that is more than coincidence. But I am not sure if that means God sent you or if you just happened to be riding by at the right moment. Does the distinction matter? I suppose not, as long as you got the help you needed. But I wonder," Victoria continued, "what it means for you. If God did answer my prayer by sending you, then that means He was listening after all, which might also mean He was listening to your prayers all those years ago too, just answering in a way you could not see at the time." Morgan felt something twist in his chest at her words. He had never thought about it that way before. What if his mother's death, as terrible as it was, had led him down a path he needed to walk? What if every hardship and every lonely night had been preparing him for this moment, when a woman praying beneath the stars needed exactly the kind of help he could provide? "That is a complicated thought," he said finally. Faith usually is, Victoria replied with a small smile. But I find I want to believe it. I want to believe that terrible things can have purpose, that loss can lead to something good, even if we cannot see it at the time. They talked late into the night, the conversation flowing easily between them. Morgan found himself sharing things he had never told anyone, thoughts and fears and dreams he had kept locked away for years. Victoria was an excellent listener, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights that surprised him with their wisdom. At some point, without either of them quite realizing it, the conversation shifted from deep philosophy to lighter topics. Victoria told him funny stories about her students, and he shared tales from cattle drives that made her laugh. The sound of her laughter did something to Morgan, warming him from the inside out. "You should laugh more often," he said without thinking. "It suits you." She ducked her head, a slight blush coloring her cheeks even in the firelight. "I have not had much to laugh about lately." "You make it easy to forget my troubles for a while." "Good. You have had too much trouble for someone so young. You deserve some peace and happiness." "So do you," she said, looking up at him with an intensity that made his heart skip. "You have been taking care of everyone else for so long, but who takes care of you?" The question hit him harder than expected. "I take care of myself. I do not need anyone." "That is not the same thing as having someone, and I think you know it." Morgan stood abruptly, suddenly needing to move. "You should get some sleep. We have another long day tomorrow." If Victoria was hurt by his sudden withdrawal, she did not show it. She simply nodded and settled onto the bedroll he had already prepared for her. "Good night, Morgan. Thank you for another day of safety and kindness." "Good night, Victoria." He stayed up long after she fell asleep, wrestling with feelings he was not sure he wanted to name. The truth was, Victoria was right. He had spent years convincing himself that solitude was strength, that needing no one meant he could never be hurt again. But in 2 days, this woman had shown him what he had been missing. Connection, real conversation, the simple pleasure of sharing space with someone who understood him. He was falling for her, Morgan realized with equal parts wonder and terror. Despite knowing her for less than 48 hours, despite the impossibility of the situation, despite every logical reason to guard his heart, he was falling completely and utterly for Victoria Ward. The question was, what was he going to do about it? The second day of their journey passed much like the first, with long hours in the saddle and frequent breaks to rest Buck. But there was a subtle shift in the dynamic between them. Morgan found himself hyper-aware of every point where their bodies touched, every time Victoria leaned back against him or turned her head to speak. If she noticed his tension, she gave no sign of it, chatting easily about everything and nothing. Around mid-afternoon, they spotted a small herd of pronghorn antelope in the distance. Morgan reined Buck to a stop and pointed them out to Victoria. "They are beautiful," she breathed. "I have never seen wild animals like that before." "This land is full of wonders if you know where to look," Morgan said. "Pronghorns are the fastest animals in North America. They can run up to 60 miles an hour when they are scared. How do you know such things? You pick up a lot when you spend as much time outdoors as I have." "That is a golden eagle," he pointed to a large bird soaring overhead. "They mate for life. And see those tracks?" He gestured to marks in the dirt near the creek they were following. "Javelina, wild pigs basically. They travel in groups and can be mean if cornered, but mostly they keep to themselves." Victoria twisted in the saddle to look at him, her face alight with interest. "You really love this land, do not you?" "I suppose I do. It is harsh and unforgiving, but it is also beautiful in its own way. It does not lie to you or pretend to be something it is not. There is an honesty to the frontier that I appreciate." I think I understand that. Missouri was pretty and civilized, but there was always so much pretense. People saying one thing and meaning another, worrying about what others thought. Here, it feels like you can just be yourself. That is exactly it, Morgan said, pleased that she understood. Out here, the only things that matter are your character and your abilities. Nobody cares about your family name or how fancy your clothes are. As the afternoon wore on, the landscape began to change again. They were entering an area of larger hills and more vegetation, signs that they were getting closer to settlements. Morgan spotted smoke from what was probably a ranch house in the distance, and he felt a curious mix of relief and regret that their solitary journey was nearly over. That night, they made camp in a grove of live oaks that provided welcome shade. Morgan managed to shoot a rabbit which he skinned and roasted over the fire. It was their first hot meal with real meat, and Victoria ate with obvious enjoyment. "This is delicious," she said. "You are quite the provider." "Basic survival skills," Morgan said, but he was pleased by her compliment. "My father taught me to hunt when I was barely tall enough to hold a rifle, said a man who cannot feed himself is not much of a man at all." "Tell me about your father," Victoria said. "You have mentioned him a few times, but always briefly." Morgan was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "He was a complicated man. Hard, sometimes harsh, but I think he loved us in his own way. He grew up poor in Tennessee, fought his way to having a small farm in Kansas. Then the war came, and he felt duty-bound to enlist with the Union. He died at Shiloh in 1862 when I was 10 years old. I barely remember him, honestly. Just impressions, really. The sound of his voice, the way he smelled like tobacco and leather. The feeling of his hand on my shoulder when I did something right. That must have been difficult, losing him so young. It was harder on my mother. She never really recovered from it, I think. She tried to keep the farm going, but it was too much for her alone. Eventually, she sold it and we moved to a town where she took in sewing. We scraped by, but there was never quite enough. When she died, I was not sure if it was cholera or just exhaustion from years of fighting to survive. Victoria reached across the space between them and touched his hand briefly. "I am sorry. No child should have to watch their parent struggle like that." The contact was fleeting, but it burned like a brand. Morgan looked at her hand, now withdrawn, and made a decision. "Victoria, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What are your plans, really? When we get to Granite, assuming you can claim your father's land, what will you do? Homesteading is hard work, even for an experienced man. For a woman alone, it is nearly impossible." She bristled slightly, her chin coming up. "I am stronger than I look. I am not afraid of hard work." "I am not questioning your strength or your work ethic," Morgan said quickly. "I am questioning the practical reality. You would need to build a house, dig a well, clear land for planting, and protect yourself from all manner of threats. How do you plan to do all that alone?" "I do not know," Victoria admitted, some of the fight leaving her. "I have been so focused on just surviving and getting to Granite that I have not thought much beyond that. I suppose I hoped I would figure it out when I got there. I have a suggestion, if you are open to hearing it." "I am listening." Morgan took a deep breath. What he was about to propose was forward, possibly inappropriate, but it felt right. "When we reach Granite, I will take the job with Dutch Crenshaw as planned, but I could help you too in my spare time. Help you build a cabin, get your homestead started." "It would not be charity," he added quickly as she started to protest. "You could pay me back eventually, or I could claim some of the land for myself if you have more than you need. I just think you could use a friend, and I seem to be available." Victoria studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." "I know you well enough," Morgan said. "And maybe I am selfish. Maybe I want an excuse to spend more time with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw. Morgan held his breath, waiting for her response. "You want to spend time with me?" Victoria asked softly. "Why?" "Because in 2 days, you have become the most interesting person I have met in 10 years of drifting. Because when you laugh, I feel like I can breathe easier. Because when you told me about your father dying and you burying him alone, I wanted to go back in time and be there so you did not have to face that by yourself. Because I think you are brave and smart and beautiful, and I cannot imagine riding away from you in granite and never seeing you again." Victoria's eyes widened and Morgan saw the shimmer of tears in them. "Morgan, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything right now. Just think about my offer. No matter what, I will help you get your claim established. But if you want more than that, if you want help building a real life here, I am offering. And if something more might develop between us, I would welcome that too. I know it is fast, and I know we barely know each other, but I also know that what I feel is real." A single tear escaped and ran down Victoria's cheek. "I thought I was alone. I thought there was no one left in the world who cared whether I lived or died. And then you appeared, like a miracle under the stars. I have been so afraid to hope, so afraid to believe that anything good could happen. But you make me want to try. So that is a yes." "That is a maybe leading strongly toward yes," Victoria said with a watery smile. "Can we take it one day at a time? See how we feel once we reach granite and the immediate crisis is over. One day at a time sounds perfect." They sat together in comfortable silence after that, the weight of unspoken possibility settling around them like a blanket. Morgan felt lighter than he had in years, as if some burden he had not known he carried had been lifted. The future was uncertain, but for the first time he was actually looking forward to it. Later, as Victoria slept, Morgan kept watch and allowed himself to imagine what a life with her might look like. A piece of land, a house they built together, maybe children running around in the yard someday. It was a vision so domestic and settled that it should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like coming home. The third day dawned bright and clear. They were making good time, and Morgan estimated they would reach granite by early evening. He felt a curious mix of anticipation and apprehension. Once they reached civilization, the bubble of intimacy they had shared on the trail would pop. Real life, with all its complications, would intrude. As they rode, Victoria seemed quieter than usual. Morgan could feel the tension in her body, the way she held herself more stiffly. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "What if I cannot claim the land? What if there is some rule that says a woman cannot inherit from her father? What if I have come all this way for nothing? Then we will figure out an alternative. Maybe you can work in town until you save enough to buy land outright, or maybe we can find another way to make it work. The point is, you are not alone anymore. Whatever happens, we will face it together." She relaxed slightly at his words, leaning back against him more fully. "Together. I like the sound of that." They crested a hill around 3 in the afternoon, and there it was, Granite, Texas. The town was larger than Morgan had expected, with a proper main street lined with buildings, several side streets branching off, and what looked like a church steeple rising above the other structures. In the distance, he could see cattle grazing on rolling hills, and the whole scene had an air of prosperity and permanence. "It is bigger than I thought," Victoria said, echoing his thoughts. "Good. That means more opportunities for both of us." They rode down the main street slowly, attracting curious stares from the townspeople. Morgan supposed they made quite a sight. Him dusty and trail-worn, Victoria disheveled despite her efforts to tidy herself, both of them sharing a horse like they were poor as church mice. He reined in at the first respectable-looking building, which turned out to be a general store. "Wait here. I will ask where we can find the land office." Inside, the store was dim and cool, a welcome relief from the heat. A middle-aged woman stood behind the counter, eyeing him with the cautious curiosity of someone used to strangers passing through. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes, madam. I am looking for the land office. Is there one in town?" "There is. Third building down on the left, across from the hotel." "You looking to file a claim?" "Something like that. Thank you for the information." As he turned to leave, she called after him. "If you are new to town and looking for work, Dutch Crenshaw is hiring. His ranch is about 5 miles south of here. Good man, fair employer." "I appreciate that. I will look him up." Back outside, he found Victoria surrounded by a small group of curious women who were peppering her with questions. She looked overwhelmed, and Morgan quickly intervened. "Excuse me, ladies. Miss Ward has had a long journey and needs to conduct some business. Perhaps you could give her some space." The women backed off reluctantly, but not before one of them, a kind-looking older lady, pressed a scrap of paper into Victoria's hand. "That is the address of the boarding house where I live. If you need a place to stay, Mrs. Harper runs a clean establishment and has room available." "Thank you," Victoria said gratefully. Morgan helped her down from the horse, and they walked together toward the land office. The building was small but official-looking, with a painted sign proclaiming it the Granite Land Office, serving Llano County, Texas since 1872. Inside, they found a bespectacled clerk sitting behind a desk piled high with papers and ledgers. He looked up as they entered, his expression neutral. "Can I help you?" Victoria stepped forward, clutching the metal box that contained her father's papers. "My name is Victoria Ward. My father, Thomas Ward, filed for a land claim through this office several months ago. He died on the journey here, and I have come to claim the land in his stead." The clerk frowned. "Let me see your documentation." Victoria opened the box with trembling hands and pulled out the papers. The clerk examined them carefully, his frown deepening. "This claim was filed by Thomas Ward. Are you his widow?" "No, I am his daughter." "I see. And your father is deceased?" "Yes. He died of fever about 2 weeks ago." The clerk shuffled through more papers, consulting a large ledger. "I have the original claim here. 200 acres in Section 18, northeast of town. The first payment was made, and the land was set aside pending Mr. Ward's arrival to take possession." "Can I take possession in his place?" Victoria asked, her voice tight with anxiety. The clerk removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. "That is a complicated question, miss. Normally, homestead claims can be inherited by a spouse or, in some cases, children over the age of 21. How old are you?" 22. "And you are unmarried?" "Yes," the clerk sighed. "Here is the situation. You can inherit the claim, but you will need to prove to the land office that you are capable of fulfilling the requirements. That means building a residence on the property within 6 months, cultivating a certain percentage of the land, and residing there for 5 continuous years. The law does not discriminate based on gender, but the practical reality is that the board will scrutinize your application carefully. They will want assurance that you are not going to abandon the claim or fail to meet the requirements." "What do I need to do to prove that?" Victoria asked. The clerk thought for a moment. "Get established in town first. Find work if possible, show that you have means to support yourself. Perhaps hire help to start building on the land. If you can demonstrate that you are serious and capable, the board will likely approve your inheritance of the claim at their next meeting, which is in 2 weeks. Victoria's shoulders slumped. 2 weeks. Morgan spoke up for the first time. "Sir, Miss Ward has traveled a long way under very difficult circumstances. Surely there is some way to expedite this process. The clerk gave him a sharp look. And who are you, Morgan Keller? I am a friend who helped Miss Ward reach Granite safely after her father died. I see. Well, Mr. Keller, the law is the law. Miss Ward can submit her claim today, and the board will review it at the next scheduled meeting. In the meantime, I suggest she get established in town and gather any supporting materials that might help her case. There was clearly no point in arguing further. Victoria filled out the necessary forms, paid a small filing fee from her precious savings, and received a receipt for her claim. As they left the office, she looked defeated. 2 weeks, she repeated. What am I supposed to do for 2 weeks? What the clerk suggested. Get established, show them you are serious, and in the meantime, I will start working for Dutch Crenshaw and begin planning how to help you build your homestead. Morgan, you do not have to do this. I am not your responsibility. He stopped walking and gently turned her to face him. They stood on the wooden sidewalk of Granite's Main Street, dusty and tired and uncertain, but in that moment, Morgan had never been more sure of anything in his life. You are not my responsibility, he agreed. You are something much more important than that. I think you might be my future if you will have me, but we do not have to figure everything out right now. Let's get you settled at that boarding house, get me out to the Crenshaw Ranch, and take things one step at a time. Can you do that? Victoria searched his face, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You are a good man, Morgan Keller. I do not know what I did to deserve you riding into my life, but I am grateful. You prayed, Morgan said simply. And somehow, impossibly, I heard you. They found the boarding house easily enough. Mrs. Harper was indeed a kind woman, probably in her 50s, with graying hair and a practical manner. She took one look at Victoria and immediately ushered her inside. You look exhausted, dear. Let's get you settled in a room and then we will discuss arrangements. I have a vacancy on the 2nd floor, nice and quiet. The rent is $3 a week, which includes 2 meals a day and laundry service. Victoria did some quick mental calculations and nodded. I can manage that for a few weeks at least. Mrs. Harper showed them up to a small but clean room with a bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. It was simple but comfortable, and Morgan could see Victoria relax slightly at the prospect of a real bed and 4 walls. I will leave you to settle in, Mrs. Harper said. Supper is at 6 o'clock in the dining room downstairs. You are welcome to join us, Mr. Keller, if you are still in town. Thank you, madam, but I need to ride out to the Crenshaw Ranch before dark. After Mrs. Harper left, Morgan lingered in the doorway, reluctant to say goodbye even though he knew he would see Victoria again soon. Will you be all right? He asked. I will be fine. You go take care of your business. The sooner you get settled, the sooner you can help me with mine. He nodded but did not move. There was so much he wanted to say, but the words tangled in his throat. Finally, he settled for simple honesty. I will come back tomorrow evening to check on you. We can discuss next steps then. I would like that. Morgan forced himself to turn and walk away, but he felt her watching him until he disappeared down the stairs. Outside, he mounted Buck and pointed the horse south, toward the Crenshaw Ranch. The ride took about 45 minutes at an easy pace. The ranch, when he reached it, was impressive. A large main house, multiple barns, a bunkhouse for the hands, and miles of fencing marking off pastures where cattle grazed. This was a serious operation, exactly the kind of stable employment Morgan had been seeking. He found Dutch Crenshaw in one of the barns, a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a weathered face and sharp blue eyes. Morgan introduced himself and explained that he was there about the job. Morgan Keller, Dutch repeated, clearly searching his memory. Right, I remember. You wrote me from San Antonio about 3 weeks back. Said you had experience with cattle drives and ranch work. Yes, sir. I worked the Kishome Trail for 3 seasons, and I have spent time on ranches in Kansas and Oklahoma. I can rope, brand, break horses, and handle any general ranch work you need. Dutch sized him up with the practiced eye of a man who knew his business. You look capable enough. Pay is $35 a month plus room and board. You will bunk with the other hands, and you will work when I say work and rest when I say rest. I do not tolerate drinking, gambling, or fighting on my property. You follow the rules, do your job, and we will get along fine. That acceptable to you? More than acceptable, sir. I appreciate the opportunity. Good. You can start tomorrow morning. We are preparing for a cattle gather next week, so there will be plenty to do. Talk to my foreman, Bill Santos. He is the Mexican fellow over by the corral. He will get you set up in the bunkhouse and explain the routine. Morgan thanked Dutch and went to find Bill Santos, who turned out to be a friendly man about Morgan's age. Bill showed him the bunkhouse, which was clean and well-maintained, and introduced him to the 3 other hands currently on the ranch. They seemed like decent men, curious about the new arrival but not unfriendly. You come from far, one of them, a lean cowboy named Jim, asked. Kansas originally, but I have been moving around Texas for the past year or so. Just rode in from the trail today, actually. Heard you rode in double with a woman, Jim said with a grin. News travels fast in a small town. Morgan felt defensive but kept his voice level. I came across Miss Ward on the trail. Her father died and she needed help reaching Granite. It seemed the decent thing to do to assist her. No offense meant, Jim said quickly. Just making conversation. She pretty. She is a lady who deserves respect, Morgan said firmly. And I would appreciate it if the men on this ranch treat her as such. Jim held up his hands. Message received, we will be gentlemen. The conversation moved on to other topics, and Morgan found himself relaxing. The other hands seemed like good men, the kind he had worked with many times before. This could be a good situation, a place where he could finally put down roots. That night, lying in an unfamiliar bunk and staring at the ceiling, Morgan thought about Victoria sleeping in her boarding house room a few miles away. He wondered if she was scared, if she was second-guessing her decision to trust him, if she was thinking about him the way he was thinking about her. Tomorrow he would see her again. They would make plans, figure out their next steps. But for tonight, he allowed himself to simply feel the warmth of hope spreading through his chest. Against all odds, he had found something worth staying for. The next 2 weeks fell into a routine. Morgan worked long days at the Crenshaw Ranch, proving himself to Dutch and earning the respect of the other hands. The work was hard but familiar, and he threw himself into it with the dedication of a man who wanted to secure his position. Every evening, as soon as he was free, he would ride into Granite to see Victoria. She had been busy as well. With Mrs. Harper's help, she had found work helping at the general store 3 days a week. It was not much, but it provided a small income and, more importantly, made her visible in the community. She was also taking sewing work on the side, using the skills her mother had taught her to hem and mend clothing for several of the townswomen. They would meet at a small restaurant on Main Street, one of the few public places where it was appropriate for an unmarried man and woman to spend time together. Over meals of beef stew and cornbread, they would talk about their days and make plans for the future. Mrs. Harper said she would be willing to testify to the land board about my character, Victoria told him one evening. And Mr. Peterson at the general store said he would write a letter supporting my claim. That is excellent, Morgan said. The more people who vouch for you, the better. Have you thought about what you want to build on the land once it is approved? A cabin, initially. something small and practical that can be expanded later. I have been reading about homesteading, and I know I will need a garden, a well, and some kind of shelter for animals if I am going to be self-sufficient. I have been thinking about that, Morgan said. I have some money saved, and with my wages from the ranch, I can help purchase materials. If we can get a basic cabin built before winter, you will be in a much better position to meet the residency requirements. Victoria bit her lip. Morgan, I cannot ask you to spend your money on me. You have done so much already. You are not asking, I am offering. Besides, I am not being entirely altruistic. I have been thinking that maybe I could file a claim adjacent to yours. Dutch mentioned that there is still open land in that section, and if I am going to help you build anyway, it makes sense that I might be building for both of us. She looked up sharply. Both of us. Morgan reached across the table and took her hand, a bold gesture in the public setting but one he could not resist. Victoria, I know it has only been a couple of weeks, but my feelings have not changed. If anything, they have gotten stronger. I think about you every moment I am not working. I want to build a life with you if you want that too. Her eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. I want that. I have been so afraid to admit it, so afraid that it was too soon or too foolish, but I do. I want a life with you, Morgan Keller. Then let's do this properly. Let me talk to the land office about filing my own claim. We can build our homestead side by side, and when the time is right, when we have known each other long enough that nobody can say we rushed, we can get married and combine our lands. What do you say? I say yes. Yes to all of it. They sat there holding hands across the table, grinning at each other like fools until the restaurant owner came over and politely reminded them that other customers were waiting for their table. The day of the land board meeting arrived with agonizing slowness. Victoria was a bundle of nerves, pacing the boarding house room and checking her appearance in the small mirror constantly. Morgan had taken the day off from the ranch, something Dutch had granted after Morgan explained the situation. They walked to the land office together, arriving 15 minutes early. The board consisted of 3 men, the county clerk, a lawyer named Mr. Hendricks, and a prosperous rancher named Mr. Carlyle. They sat behind a long table in a room at the back of the land office, reviewing papers and looking official. When Victoria's case was called, she stood before them and made her plea. She presented her father's original claim documents, the death certificate she had managed to obtain in San Antonio before his burial, and letters of support from Mrs. Harper, Mr. Peterson, and even Dutch Crenshaw, who had written on Morgan's behalf stating that Victoria had the support of a capable and employed man who could assist her in meeting the homestead requirements. The board members asked her questions about her plans, her financial situation, and her experience with farming or ranching. Victoria answered honestly, acknowledging her lack of experience, but emphasizing her willingness to learn and her determination to honor her father's dream. Finally, the board members conferred quietly among themselves for what felt like an eternity. Then Mr. Hendricks, the lawyer, cleared his throat. Miss Ward, the board has reviewed your petition and the supporting materials. While we acknowledge that you face challenges as a single woman attempting to prove up a homestead claim, we are impressed by your determination and the support you have gathered from the community. Therefore, we are approving the transfer of the claim from your late father to you, conditional upon your meeting all standard homestead requirements within the prescribed time frame. You will need to build a habitable residence within 6 months, reside on the land for 5 years, and cultivate a portion of it for agricultural purposes. Do you understand and accept these terms? I do, Victoria said, her voice shaking with relief. Thank you. Thank you so much. Outside the land office, Victoria collapsed against Morgan, finally allowing the tension to leave her body. "I cannot believe it. The land is mine. I actually have a homestead." "You have a homestead," Morgan confirmed, holding her close and not caring who might see. "And tomorrow, I am going to file for the adjacent parcel. Then we can start building our future." True to his word, Morgan filed his claim the next day. The process was quicker for him since he was employed and had no complications with inherited land. Within a week, he had his own 200 acres adjoining Victoria's property to the east. They rode out to see the land together on a Sunday afternoon, Morgan's only full day off. The property was beautiful in a raw, untamed way. Rolling hills covered in native grasses, scattered live oak and juniper, a small creek that ran year-round according to the land office maps. The soil looked decent for growing, and there was plenty of grazing land for livestock. "This is it," Victoria said, standing in the middle of what would be her property. "This is where I will build my life." "Where we will build our lives," Morgan corrected. "Together." They chose a site for the cabin on a slight rise that would provide good drainage and a view of the surrounding land. Morgan paced off the dimensions, already planning in his head how to construct it. He had built cabins before during his years of drifting, and while he was no expert carpenter, he knew enough to create something solid and functional. Over the next month, Morgan spent every spare moment working on the cabin. The other ranch hands, after hearing about his project, volunteered to help on their days off. It turned out that cowboys, for all their rough exteriors, were hopeless romantics at heart. The story of Morgan helping a woman in distress and then falling in love with her had spread through the bunkhouse, and to a man, they wanted to see the couple succeed. Victoria was not idle either. She continued working at the store and taking in sewing, saving every penny she could. She also began acquiring the supplies they would need: tools, seeds for planting, chickens for eggs, and basic furniture. Mrs. Harper helped her navigate the practical aspects of setting up a household, teaching her skills that her mother had not had time to pass on before she died. As autumn approached, the cabin began to take shape. It was a simple structure, one room with a sleeping loft, but it was sturdy and well built. Morgan installed a stone fireplace that would provide heat and a place to cook. The roof was tight against rain and the door hung straight on its hinges. On a crisp October morning, they moved Victoria's belongings from the boarding house to the new cabin. It was not much, just her trunk of clothes, some kitchen supplies, and a few personal items, but it transformed the empty structure into a home. "I need to stay here now," Victoria said, looking around the cabin with a mix of pride and trepidation. "To meet the residency requirement." "I know," Morgan said. "I wish you did not have to be alone, but we have to follow the letter of the law. I will be fine. It is only a few miles to town, and you are just over the hill on your own property." They had discussed this extensively. Morgan could not stay with Victoria without them being married, as it would be scandalous and potentially jeopardize her claim. But he hated the thought of her being isolated and vulnerable. They had compromised by agreeing that he would ride over every morning before work and every evening after, checking on her and making sure she had everything she needed. The first few weeks were an adjustment. Victoria had never lived completely alone before, and the isolation was challenging. But she threw herself into making the homestead functional. She planted a fall garden with cool weather crops, built a proper chicken coop for her small flock, and began the back-breaking work of clearing land for future cultivation. Morgan worked equally hard on his own property while continuing his job at the Crenshaw Ranch. He built a small shelter for himself, not as nice as Victoria's cabin but adequate for his needs. He also began accumulating livestock, purchasing a few head of cattle and a milk cow that he shared with Victoria. Through it all, their relationship deepened. They saw each other twice a day, every day, and those moments became the highlights of their existence. They would talk about their dreams, their fears, their plans for the future. Morgan would help with heavy labor that Victoria could not manage alone, and she would feed him meals that were infinitely better than bunkhouse cooking. As winter set in, bringing cold nights and occasional freezes, they began discussing marriage more seriously. They had been in each other's lives for 4 months now, which seemed like both an eternity and no time at all. Morgan knew, beyond any shadow of doubt, that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with this woman. And Victoria, who had been alone and desperate just a few months before, had found in Morgan a partner who understood her, supported her, and loved her without reservation. It was Christmas Eve when Morgan finally asked her properly. He rode up to her cabin in the late afternoon, carrying a small wrapped package. Victoria greeted him at the door with a smile, her face flushed from the heat of the fire and the excitement of the holiday. "I have something for you," they said in unison, then laughed. "You first," Morgan insisted. Victoria retrieved a bundle from the trunk at the foot of her bed and handed it to him. Inside, he found a beautiful shirt she had sewn from deep blue fabric that matched his eyes. The stitching was immaculate, and she had even embroidered his initials on the pocket. "Victoria, this is beautiful. This must have taken you weeks. I wanted you to have something special. You have given me so much, and I wanted to give you something made with my own hands." Morgan was overwhelmed. He had owned few nice things in his life, and the idea that she had spent hours crafting something specifically for him touched him deeply. "Thank you. I will treasure this always. Now, open yours." Victoria unwrapped the small package to find a delicate gold locket on a chain. It was simple but well made, and when she opened it, she found a tiny photograph inside. It took her a moment to realize it was a picture of Morgan, taken at the photography studio in town. "Oh, Morgan," she breathed. "How did you afford this? I have been saving since I started working for Dutch. I wanted you to have something that showed how serious I am about us, about our future." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "It is perfect. Will you help me put it on?" As Morgan fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers brushing the soft skin there, he felt his heart pounding. This was it, the moment he had been both anticipating and dreading. He stepped back and then, to Victoria's surprise, dropped to one knee. "Morgan, what are you doing?" "Something I should have done weeks ago." "Victoria Ward, you are the bravest, strongest, most incredible woman I have ever known. You came into my life like a miracle, an answered prayer I did not even know I had whispered. Every day I spend with you makes me more certain that you are the only future I want. I know we have not known each other long by conventional standards, but I know my own heart. So I am asking, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you have made me?" Victoria dropped to her knees in front of him, taking his face in her hands. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I will marry you, Morgan Keller, and I will spend every day thanking God that He sent me you." They kissed then, a kiss that started tender and became passionate, conveying all the love and longing they had been holding back. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. "When?" Victoria asked. "When should we get married?" "As soon as possible. Tomorrow, if the preacher in Granite will do it. I do not want to wait any longer to start our life together." "Tomorrow is Christmas," Victoria pointed out. "Even better. What better day to begin our future than one celebrating miracles?" They were married on Christmas Day, 1878, in the small church in Granite. Mrs. Harper stood up as Victoria's witness, and Dutch Crenshaw, who had become something of a mentor to Morgan, served as his. The other ranch hands attended, along with several townspeople who had come to know and respect Victoria during her months in town. Victoria wore the best dress she owned, the blue calico that Morgan had first seen her in, which she had cleaned and mended until it looked almost new. Morgan wore his new shirt, his good pants and boots he had polished to a shine. They were not a fancy couple, but the love between them was evident to everyone in attendance. The ceremony was simple, but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife and Morgan kissed his bride, there was not a dry eye in the church. This was a love story the whole town had watched unfold, and they were invested in its happy ending. After the ceremony, Mrs. Harper and some of the other ladies had organized a small reception in the church hall. There was food and music, and for a few hours, Morgan and Victoria forgot about homestead requirements and hard work and all the challenges still ahead. They danced and laughed and accepted the well wishes of their friends. As evening fell, they rode together back to Victoria's cabin, which was now their cabin. Morgan had moved his few belongings over that morning, and for the first time, they would sleep under the same roof as husband and wife. Inside the cabin, Victoria had lit candles and stoked the fire, creating a warm and welcoming atmosphere. They stood together in the center of the room, suddenly shy despite the months they had known each other. "Hello, wife," Morgan said softly. "Hello, husband," Victoria replied, a smile playing at her lips. "I love you, Victoria Keller. I loved you when I first saw you praying under those stars, though I did not know it yet. I love you more now than I thought possible, and I will love you more still with every day that passes." "I love you too. You saved my life, Morgan, not just physically, though you did that too. But you saved me from despair, from loneliness, from giving up. You showed me that there was still goodness in the world, still reasons to hope." They came together then, and if the physical expression of their love was tentative and sweet, it was also profound. They took their time learning each other, finding joy in every discovery, creating memories that would sustain them through the hard times ahead. As they lay together afterward, Victoria's head on Morgan's chest and his arms wrapped around her, they talked quietly about their future. "We should combine our homestead claims," Morgan said, his fingers trailing through her hair. "File the paperwork to merge them into one property. That way we are building one life, not two separate ones." "I would like that. And I was thinking in the spring we should expand the cabin. Add another room, maybe two. I want space for children someday." "Children," Morgan repeated, the word filling him with a warmth he had not expected. "How many children are we talking about? I do not know. However many God blesses us with, but at least two so they have each other. I hated being an only child, especially after my parents died. Two or more sounds perfect. We will need to clear more land for crops if we are going to feed a family. And maybe I should talk to Dutch about buying some of his cattle to start our own herd. Between ranching and farming, we should be able to build something really substantial." They continued planning late into the night, their dreams interweaving until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Finally, exhaustion claimed them, and they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Morgan continued working for Dutch Crenshaw while also developing their own ranch. Victoria proved to be an adept homesteader, her intelligence and determination compensating for her lack of experience. Their combined properties flourished, the cabin was expanded as planned, and their herd grew steadily. In the fall of 1880, almost exactly 2 years after they first met, Victoria gave birth to their first child, a healthy boy they named Thomas, after her father. Morgan was present for the birth, holding Victoria's hand and wiping her brow, overwhelmed by the miracle of new life. "He is perfect," Morgan whispered, holding his son for the first time. "Thank you for this gift." "We made him together," Victoria said, exhausted but glowing. "He is ours, a piece of both of us." Thomas was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Sarah, after Morgan's mother. 2 years after that came another boy, Daniel, and finally, a fourth child, a girl named Grace, born in 1886. The Keller family became well known in Granite and the surrounding area. Morgan's reputation as a fair and hardworking man earned him respect, and he eventually bought out his own small ranch adjacent to their homestead, expanding their holdings. Victoria became known for her kindness, often helping new settlers navigate the challenges of frontier life, just as others had helped her. As their children grew, Morgan and Victoria would sometimes tell them the story of how they met. The children loved hearing about their mother praying under the stars and their father appearing like an answer from heaven. It became family legend, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope was possible. On their 10th anniversary, Morgan took Victoria back to the place where he had first found her. They left the children with Mrs. Harper, who had become like a grandmother to them, and rode out to the limestone outcropping that had been the site of her desperate prayer. The spot looked much the same, though the wagon and buried belongings were long gone. They had returned months after their wedding with proper equipment and retrieved everything, finding most of it intact. Those rescued items now filled their home, physical reminders of how far they had come. As the sun set and the stars began to appear, they spread a blanket and lay on their backs, looking up at the vast Texas sky just as Victoria had done alone so many years before. "You remember what you prayed for that night?" Morgan asked, lacing his fingers through hers. "I prayed for help, for someone to guide me through the darkness. I remember feeling so alone, so certain that no one cared whether I lived or died. And then I showed up." "And then you showed up," Victoria confirmed, turning her head to look at him. "My answered prayer, my miracle." "I was no miracle, just a man who happened to be riding by." "You are wrong," Victoria said firmly. "You were exactly what I needed, exactly when I needed it. That is the definition of a miracle. And you did not just save me that night, Morgan. You saved me every day since. You gave me a life worth living, a family to love, a future to look forward to." Morgan rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. In the starlight, she looked almost the same as she had that first night, though he could see the changes time had wrought. Fine lines around her eyes from years of smiling, a few silver threads in her dark hair, the soft fullness of a body that had borne 4 children. To him, she had never been more beautiful. "You saved me too," he said. "I was drifting through life with no purpose, no direction. I thought I was content being alone, but I was just afraid of what it might cost me to care about someone again. You showed me that love was worth the risk, that building a life with someone was better than any solitary existence. So we saved each other. I suppose we did." They lay there together as full darkness fell, and the stars came out in their millions, the same stars that had witnessed Victoria's prayer and Morgan's arrival. The night was quiet except for the sounds of distant cattle and the whisper of wind through the grass. "You ever pray anymore?" Victoria asked. "Yes," Morgan admitted. "Not the way I used to as a boy, all formal and recited, but I find myself saying thank you to whoever might be listening, especially when I look at you and our children. How could I not be grateful for this life? I pray too. Every night before I sleep, I thank God for sending you to me, and I pray that our children will find even a fraction of the happiness we have found together." They stayed on that hillside for hours, talking and remembering and dreaming about the future. Eventually, the cold drove them back home, but neither would ever forget that night, a perfect bookend to the evening when their story began. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and challenges. They lost crops to drought and cattle to harsh winters. Morgan broke his leg in 1889 when a horse threw him, and Victoria nursed him back to health with determined patience. In 1891, scarlet fever swept through Granite, and they held their breath until all 4 children recovered, grateful beyond measure that death had not visited their home. But the good times far outweighed the bad. They watched their children grow into capable, loving people. Thomas proved to be a natural with animals and took over much of the ranch work as he matured. Sarah had her mother's intelligence and her father's determination, becoming the first schoolteacher in the family. Daniel was the dreamer, always sketching and planning improvements to the ranch. And Grace, the baby, had a sunny disposition that brightened every room she entered. In 1898, 20 years after they first met, Morgan and Victoria sat on the porch of their expanded home and watched the sunset together. It had become their evening ritual, this quiet time when they could simply be together without the demands of ranch work or children requiring attention. 20 years, Victoria mused. It seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Do you have any regrets? Morgan asked. None, not a single one. You? Only that I did not find you sooner so we could have had even more years together. Victoria laughed and squeezed his hand. We have had plenty of years, and God willing, we will have many more. Our oldest will be married next spring, Morgan. We are going to be grandparents eventually. Grandparents, Morgan repeated, marveling at the concept. When did we get old enough for that? We are not old. We are seasoned, experienced, well-aged like fine wine. I have never had fine wine. Neither have I, but I imagine it is something like us, better with time. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. The ranch sprawled around them, hundreds of acres of land they had worked with their own hands, buildings they had constructed, fences they had mended. It was a legacy, something tangible they could pass to their children and grandchildren. Victoria. Yes. If you could go back to that night when you were alone and scared and praying under the stars, what would you tell yourself? Victoria thought about it carefully before answering. I would tell myself to hold on, that help was coming. That even though everything seemed hopeless, there was a man riding toward me who would change everything. I would tell myself to have faith, not just in God, but in the possibility of love and new beginnings. And I would tell myself that the worst night of my life was actually the beginning of the best life I could have imagined. That is a good answer. What would you tell yourself if you could go back to the night before you found me? Morgan considered. I would tell myself to trust the impulse to investigate that sound on the wind, even though it seemed easier to just ride on by. I would tell myself that the best decision I would ever make was choosing to help someone in need. And I would tell myself that the faith my mother tried to teach me was real, even if I had stopped believing. Sometimes prayers are answered, just not always in the way we expect. As full darkness fell and the first stars appeared, they remained on the porch, hands clasped and hearts full. Around them, their ranch settled into nighttime rhythms. In the house behind them, they could hear their children laughing over some shared joke. In the distance, cattle lowed and a horse nickered. This was the life Victoria had prayed for without knowing it, the future Morgan had given up hoping he could have. 2 broken people who had found each other in the wilderness and built something beautiful from the ruins of their past losses. Morgan turned to his wife, seeing in her face the girl who had knelt beneath the stars, the young woman who had trusted him enough to follow him to Granite, the mother who had borne his children, the partner who had worked beside him through every challenge. She was all of these women and more, and he loved every version of her. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For praying that night. For believing help would come. For giving me the chance to be that help and for letting me love you. Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, settling against him like she had thousands of times before. And thank you for hearing my prayer, for being exactly what I needed, and for loving me better than I ever dreamed possible. They sat together until the stars filled the sky, the same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their story. And if someone had been listening very carefully, they might have heard two voices speaking in unison, offering a prayer of gratitude for a love that had started with desperation and bloomed into a lifetime of devotion. The next morning dawned bright and clear, beginning another day in the life they had built together. Morgan rose early, as always, and started the coffee brewing. Victoria joined him shortly after, moving around their kitchen with the ease of long practice. They worked in comfortable silence, preparing breakfast for themselves and whichever of their children might wander down, before heading off to their own pursuits. As Morgan watched his wife pouring coffee and humming softly to herself, he was struck again by how fortunate he was. He had been a drifter, a man with no real home or purpose, and now he had everything. A wife he adored, children who were growing into fine people, land he could call his own, and a community where he belonged. Victoria caught him staring and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" "Just counting my blessings. And I have more than I can count." She crossed to him and kissed him gently. "So do I, my love, so do I." Their story, which had begun with a desperate prayer under the stars and a cowboy who chose to help, had become exactly what it was always meant to be. A testament to the power of faith, the possibility of love, and the truth that sometimes, when we most need saving, salvation appears in the most unexpected forms. Morgan had been the answer to Victoria's prayer, but she had been the answer to his unspoken longing as well. Together, they had created not just a home or a family, but a love story that would be remembered and retold long after they were gone, a reminder that even in the darkest night, hope was never truly lost. And so they lived, loved, and prospered, their lives intertwined like the roots of two trees planted side by side, drawing strength from each other and from the land they had claimed together. When they were old and gray, surrounded by children and grandchildren, they would still hold hands and look at the stars, remembering that night when everything changed, when a woman prayed and a cowboy answered, and two lonely souls found the home they had always been searching for in each other's arms.